Hello everyone, and welcome to my Bold and Beautiful Today channel. The Ridge raises the hand from the shores of the sea and Brooke Ridge's hand hold on trying to get up from the sea. In the dramatic rescue, Ridge is Brooke's hero. In a dramatic rescue, Ridge Forrester will save Brooke Logan, while Grace Buckingham will be pleading with John Finnegan. When Ridge saw Brooke in trouble in Italy, he simply dove into the water. Ridge swims over to assist Brooke, who is trying to stay afloat after falling off Nick Marone's boat due to steering issues. It's true that Ridge will find Brooke and pull her to safety. Brooke will be enmeshed in this moment of appreciation for Ridge since she will receive a surprise hero in the form of her ex. Naturally, Nick might be able to observe for himself that Brooke and Ridge remain close. It will be clearly visible in front of Nick, who might have to deal with Ridge's rage about the boat's issues and the risk he just put Brooke in. Ridge saves Brooke when she falls off the boat, into the Mediterranean. As usual, Ridge makes the decision that he wants Brooke back. What will Taylor think about this? Will she fight for Ridge or go back to Europe? Do you want Ridge with Brooke once more, or did you want Brooke with Nick? Perhaps some people just want this boomer love triangle to be resolved once and for all, regardless of who ends up with whom. Eric tells Ridge he sees a ring. I believe he will pop the question. Ridge races around to find Brooke before his brother proposes to her. He sees Brooke sprawled out in the sun on Nick's boat as he drives. Eric reminds Ridge that he must act swiftly to get Brooke back before it's too late. Brooke and Nick go off on his yacht. While on a boat excursion, Nick is ready to pop the question to Brooke, not realizing that Ridge is hurrying to Naples to intercept him. When his brother plays Popeye with Brooke, Ridge sneers. Ridge is urged by Eric to prevent Nick from seeing Brooke again. Ridge goes off to find Brooke. When Brooke falls in the Mediterranean, Ridge makes a splash save. Nick Marone's sleek yacht, the Serendipity, the salty breeze tousling her hair as she tried to enjoy the coastal panorama despite the undercurrent of tension that always seemed to simmer between her, Nick, and the ever-present shadow of her past with Ridge Forrester, who had unexpectedly appeared nearby. The next, a violent, shuddering lurch seized the vessel, a catastrophic failure in the steering mechanism Nick had been complaining about intermittently all morning, throwing the yacht off course with a sickening groan of protesting metal. The force was brutal and unexpected. Brooke, caught off balance, felt the railing vanish from beneath her hands as her world tilted violently. A gasp tore from her throat, swallowed instantly by the roar of wind and water as she plunged overboard, the shock of the cold sea hitting her like a physical blow, stealing her breath before she even fully registered the fall. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her as she sank, disoriented, bubbles streaming past her face, the sunlight above fracturing into wavering, distant shards. Her elegant dress became a sodden weight, dragging her down, and the struggle to kick towards the elusive surface felt futile against the insistent pull of the depths. Her lungs screamed for air, burning with the desperate need she couldn't satisfy, the vibrant blue world around her blurring into a terrifying haze of green and shadow. Thrashing wildly, her arms flailed, seeking purchase in the liquid void, her mind clouding with the primal terror of drowning, the idyllic afternoon shattered into a desperate fight for survival. Above, chaos erupted on the deck of the Serendipity. Nick, white-faced and shouting Brooke's name with raw horror, wrestled frantically with the unresponsive wheel, the boat circling erratically, useless in the immediate crisis. But on the nearby shore, where Ridge Forrester had been observing the yacht with a mixture of brooding concern and unresolved longing, the scene unfolded with horrifying clarity. He saw the lurch, the terrifying arc of Brooke's body as she was flung over the railing, the splash that seemed to echo like a gunshot across the water. Time compressed. Thought vanished, replaced by pure, adrenalized instinct. Without a heartbeat's hesitation, without shedding his jacket or even kicking off his shoes, Ridge launched himself forward in a desperate, powerful dive from the rocky outcrop. The cool water enveloped him, but he registered nothing except the urgent need to reach her, his powerful strokes cutting through the waves with singular, ferocious purpose, his eyes fixed on the spot where she'd disappeared, scanning the turbulent surface for any sign of her. He was a missile honed by decades of love, conflict, and an unbreakable, if complicated, bond, zeroing in on the woman who, despite everything, remained his epicenter. He spotted the frantic disturbance in the water, the desperate splash of a hand breaking the surface before being sucked under again. "Brooke!" His cry was ripped away by the wind and water, but it fueled his limbs, driving him harder, faster, every muscle straining against the resistance. He reached the spot just as she surfaced again, choking, her eyes wide with terror, her strength visibly ebbing. "Ridge," she gasped, water flooding her mouth, the single syllable a plea ripped from her soul. "I've got you." "Hold on," he commanded, his voice rough with exertion and fear, but radiating an authority that cut through her panic. He closed the final distance, his arms encircling her torso firmly, pulling her back against his chest, anchoring her flailing body. The fight wasn't over. Brooke, gripped by the primal terror of drowning, instinctively thrashed, her panic making her a danger to them both. "Brooke, look at me. Look at me." Ridge barked, his face inches from hers, forcing her terrified gaze to meet his intense, unwavering one. "Stop fighting. I have you. Trust me. Breathe." The sheer force of his presence, the familiar intensity in those hazel eyes, pierced the fog of her panic. She went momentarily still, gulping air, clinging to him like a lifeline. "That's it," he urged, his voice softening fractionally but losing none of its urgency. "Just hold on to me. Don't let go." With Brooke now semi-cooperative, though trembling violently, Ridge shifted his grip, securing her firmly with one arm across her chest, his other arm powering them both through the choppy water towards the nearest stretch of rocky shoreline, ignoring the burning in his muscles, the drag of their clothes, the sting of salt water in his eyes. Every stroke was a battle against the sea and exhaustion, his focus laser-sharp on the jagged rocks growing slowly, agonizingly closer, Brooke's ragged breathing against his neck his only soundtrack, her weight a precious burden he refused to relinquish. He kicked with all his might, his designer shoes long forgotten on the seabed, his sole purpose Brooke's survival. Behind them, Nick had finally managed to partially regain control, bringing the yacht as close as he dared to the treacherous rocks, his face a mask of anguish and helpless fury as he watched Ridge's agonizingly slow progress, the reality of his own failure, the faulty steering, the danger he'd unwittingly placed Brooke in, crashing down on him with brutal force. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Ridge's feet scraped against sharp rocks and gravel beneath the water. He stumbled, nearly falling, but managed to find purchase, hauling Brooke and himself through the shallows onto a narrow, pebbled beach. They collapsed together onto the rough stones, gasping, coughing up seawater, utterly spent. Ridge immediately rolled Brooke onto her side, supporting her as she retched, his hand rubbing her back with a tenderness that belied the ferocity of his rescue. "You're okay," he murmured hoarsely, water dripping from his hair onto her shoulder. "You're safe. Breathe, Brooke. Just breathe." Slowly, the violent coughing subsided. Brooke lay back, trembling uncontrollably, her chest heaving, her eyes closed as she focused on drawing air into her ravaged lungs. Then, she opened them, turning her head to look up at Ridge. He was kneeling beside her, soaked through, hair plastered to his forehead, his expensive clothes ruined, his chest rising and falling rapidly. But in that moment, to Brooke, he wasn't the complicated ex-husband, the source of so much pain and passion, he was a colossus. He was the man who hadn't hesitated, who had defied the sea itself to reach her. The sheer magnitude of what he had done, the selfless courage, the undeniable proof of his unwavering presence in her moment of ultimate peril, washed over her with a force stronger than the waves that had tried to claim her. Gratitude, profound and overwhelming, surged through her, mingling with the residual terror and a startling reawakening of something deep and fundamental she had tried, perhaps unsuccessfully, to bury. "Ridge," she whispered, her voice raw and shaky, tears welling in her eyes, mixing with the seawater on her cheeks. Her hand reached out, trembling, and grasped his forearm, her grip surprisingly strong. You saved me. You jumped, you didn't even think." The words choked off, replaced by a sob that was half relief, half something else entirely. She looked at him, really looked at him, the worry etched around his eyes, the exhaustion, the fierce protective light still burning within them, and in that shared, breathless space, stripped bare of pretense by the immediacy of death, the years of separation, the bitterness, the other relationships, seemed to dissolve. He was her hero. Not a title bestowed lightly, but earned in the most visceral way possible. He was her Ridge, the man whose arms had always been her sanctuary, even when the sanctuary had cracks. The intensity of the connection crackled between them, a palpable energy born of shared trauma and an ancient, undeniable bond reforged in the crucible of the sea. Her gaze held his, filled with an awe and a vulnerability that spoke volumes more than words ever could. She was utterly swept up in the enormity of the moment, in the sheer, life-affirming power of his act, her heart overflowing with a gratitude that felt dangerously close to something far deeper and more perilous. This raw, intimate tableau unfolded mere yards from where the Serendipity now bobbed uneasily in the shallows. Nick Morone stood frozen on the deck, the frantic shouts of his crew to secure the yacht fading into a dull roar in his ears. He witnessed it all, Ridge's desperate dive, the agonizing struggle in the water, the tender care on the shore. But it was this moment that struck him like a physical blow, the way Brooke looked at Ridge. It wasn't just gratitude, it was an unveiling, a revelation of a connection so profound, so intrinsic, that it transcended their divorce, their betrayals, his presence in her life. The raw emotion radiating from Brooke, the fierce protectiveness still emanating from Ridge even as he knelt gasping on the stones, it was a language only they spoke, a frequency Nick suddenly realized he could never truly access. The realization was a cold knife twisting in his gut. His fury at the boat's malfunction, his guilt over Brooke's near death, was instantly eclipsed by the devastating understanding that, in this moment of ultimate crisis, he had been powerless, while Ridge had been everything. He had watched the man he considered a rival not only save the woman he loved but also, in doing so, expose the unbreakable thread that still bound Brooke and Ridge Forrester together. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, knuckles white, his jaw set in a rigid line. He had brought Brooke to Italy hoping for a fresh start, a romantic escape, only to see her nearly perish and then witness her soul laid bare for her ex-husband. And as Ridge, finally catching his breath, lifted his head, his gaze locking onto Nick still on the yacht, the protective fury that had driven him into the water transformed into something cold and dangerous. Ridge's eyes, moments ago filled with concern for Brooke, now burned with an incandescent rage directed solely at Nick. The fury over the boat's treacherous malfunction, the sheer negligence that had almost cost Brooke her life, surged to the forefront. Nick saw it coming, the storm of accusation, the righteous anger of the hero who had stepped into the breach Nick himself couldn't fill. The dramatic rescue had not only saved Brooke's life, it had violently realigned the emotional landscape, leaving Nick stranded on the periphery, facing the wrath of the hero and the devastating knowledge of where Brooke's heart, in its most vulnerable moment, truly resided. Meanwhile, continents away in Los Angeles, oblivious to the life-or-death drama unfolding on the Italian coast, Grace Buckingham, her own heart heavy with a different kind of desperation, prepared to make a plea born of love and fear to Dr. John Finnegan, seeking her own form of rescue in a complex web of relationships and looming threats, a stark contrast to the primal, life-saving heroism witnessed on the sun-drenched, terror-stricken shores of the Mediterranean. The Ridge raised the hand from the shores of the sea, not as a limb of flesh and bone, but as the very essence of the land asserting its ancient, weathered presence against the eternal siege of the ocean, a colossal fist of bedrock, draped in the tattered green velvet of tenacious mosses and stunted, wind-sculpted pines, its knuckles formed by outcrops scarred by glacial claws and the relentless lash of salt-laden gales, its fingers stretching skyward as defiant promontories that clawed at the lowering clouds, stained perpetually damp by the sea's weeping breath. This hand was the land's primal response, a slow-motion rebuttal etched in geological time, a monument to endurance sculpted not by sudden violence but by the infinite patience of erosion and uplift, where the immense pressure of tectonic yearning deep within the planet's fiery heart finally found expression, pushing upwards, millimeter by agonizing millimeter over epochs, until the earth itself broke the surface tension of the brine, a knuckle here, a wrist there, ultimately forming this monumental gesture, a raised hand that was simultaneously a shield against the battering waves, a testament to the land's submerged origins now defiantly exposed, and a silent, stony salute to the relentless forces that had shaped it, forever poised in that moment of emergence, dripping with the memory of submersion, crusted with barnacles at its tidal base like ancient, calcified rings, while higher up, lichen spread like verdigris on bronze, recording centuries of sun and storm. Yet, this solitary act of terrestrial assertion was met not with triumphant isolation, but with a desperate, mirrored struggle, and Brooke Ridge's hand hold on trying to get up from the sea. Here, the metaphor fractured into poignant duality, shifting from the monumental, almost mythic scale of the ridge to the intensely human, vulnerable figure of Brooke Ridge, whose name echoed the landform as if she were its spirit or its fragile counterpart, now immersed not metaphorically but terrifyingly literally in the churning, cold embrace of the very sea the land resisted. Brooke's hand, small, fleshly, trembling with exertion and cold, breached the surface, fingers splayed against the indifferent gray sky, grasping not at rock but at air, at hope, at the vanishing vapor of survival. It was a hand clenched in the purest, most visceral expression of the will to live, tendons standing out like cables, skin bleached pale and wrinkled by prolonged immersion, perhaps bruised or torn by unseen rocks below, yet radiating an undeniable, fierce energy. This hand held on, not to anything tangible yet, but to the sheer, desperate concept of not sinking, to the fragile thread of consciousness fraying in the numbing cold, to the memory of air and lungs now burning for it, to the image of a sun-warmed shore that felt continents away in this liquid desert. It was an anchor point for her entire being, the focal point of a struggle against overwhelming gravity and the sucking void beneath. The sea around her hand wasn't a passive boundary but an active, malevolent force. Waves, indifferent as time itself, slapped at her knuckles, seeking to submerge them again. Currents, unseen and powerful, tugged relentlessly at her submerged body, threatening to pull her back into the dark, silent depths from which she had momentarily fought free. The salt stung her eyes, blurred her vision, making the distant, solid hand of the ridge shimmer like a mirage, an unattainable promise of stability. Her struggle was immediate, intimate, and terrifyingly finite compared to the geological epoch of the ridge's emergence. Every fraction of an inch gained was a victory bought with exhausting muscular contraction and ragged breath, every slip backward a plunge towards oblivion. The core of the phrase resonated in this agonizing tension. Brooke Ridge's hand was trying to get up, enacting on a human scale what the ridge had achieved over eons, an ascent from the engulfing sea. Her effort mirrored the land's, but compressed into heartbeats, fraught with a peril the stone never knew. She wasn't rising yet, she was trying to get up, caught in the excruciating liminal space between drowning and salvation, her hand the sole, fragile evidence of her presence and her fight, a beacon of desperate life in the vast, uncaring expanse. The conjunction and became a universe of connection and contrast, linking the enduring, symbolic hand of the land with the trembling, mortal hand of the woman, comparing the patient, inevitable rise of geology with the frantic, precarious struggle against drowning, juxtaposing the land's victory over the sea with a human battle still terrifyingly undecided. It spoke of shared origin, both emerging from the sea, one permanently, the other fighting for it, shared defiance, but also the brutal difference in scale and consequence. The land's hand was raised in stoic permanence, a fact of the landscape. Brooke's hand was raised in fleeting, urgent supplication, a question mark against the waves. To witness this scene was to feel the profound duality of existence, the awe-inspiring permanence of the earth and the heart-stopping fragility of the individual life clinging to it. The salt spray that glistened on the ridge's stony knuckles was the same salt that choked Brooke, the wind that whistled through the crags above howled with the same voice that ripped at the surface around her struggling form. The ridge's hand, raised in ancient triumph, became a silent, unyielding witness to Brooke's contemporary agony, a potential sanctuary frustratingly near yet agonizingly far across the treacherous, surging water that separated the achieved emergence from the desperate attempt. Her hold on was both literal, as her muscles screamed against fatigue and the water's weight, and metaphorical, clinging to consciousness, identity, the very spark of being against the encroaching cold numbness that promised release into oblivion. Each surge of a wave was a potential executioner, each gasp of air snatched in the troughs was a temporary reprieve. The sea, in this moment, was not just a body of water but the embodiment of chaos, indifference, and the ultimate return, the primordial soup from which life crawled and to which it could so easily revert. Brooke Ridge's hand, holding on, trying to get up, was humanity itself confronting this abyss, asserting its ephemeral light against the dark, cold depths, her struggle echoing the fundamental, universal fight for existence, for breath, for a foothold in an often hostile universe. The pathos lay in the sheer effort condensed in that trying, the immense energy expended for minimal visible gain, the courage required to keep fighting when surrender would be so much easier, the vulnerability of that single hand exposed above the surface, the only sign of the silent, submerged battle for life raging beneath the waves. It was a moment suspended between despair and hope, defined entirely by the relentless, agonizing effort to ascend, to escape the suffocating embrace, to reach the solid, enduring hand of the land that had, impossibly long ago, completed the very journey she now fought with every fading ounce of strength to begin. The image fused the epic and the intimate, the eternal and the instantaneous, the land's monumental history and a single human's desperate present, all contained within the stark, visceral poetry of those two hands, one risen, ancient, and stony, the other rising, mortal, and trembling, forever captured in the act of trying to get up from the sea.